Hello everyone, welcome to another video. In this video, we will add interactive documentation to our REST API. And by interactive documentation, I mean what you can currently see on the screen. This is a Swagger web application. So this web application describes our API. So it has all the endpoints that we currently do have. It has the schema of our book. So basically it shows, okay, how our book looks like, what attributes does it have. And then it has all the endpoints. And then you can basically very easily come in here and go into an endpoint and try it out so you can make a call. And from experience, I know that something like this is much better, especially if you want to work with developers. They will appreciate something like this much more than when you just give them a written documentation, like for example, Confluence. And here, now let me just authorize this API because we still have to authorize. If you remember, if you have watched the previous videos, you will remember that our API is authorized with API keys. But if you haven't, this is no problem. In the description, you can have the code. So basically what I will post in the description is one branch from the GitHub repository will have the code before this video, and one branch from the repository will have the code at the end of this video. So even if you did not follow the previous REST API episodes, you'll be able to just clone the repository and follow along, or you can just watch the video and apply this to your own API. Okay, so now that I have authorized it, I can just come in here, click on try it out and click execute. And you can see the server has responded with a JSON as it should. We can also try to create a book. So basically here we have some example data. Once again, try it out, execute, and we get a response that the book has been created. Let's copy the ID. And I can go to a get. I can get this time only a particular book, right? So here you can see the book that we just created and the ID that was created with it. I can update this book. So I can just go to patch to try it out. To ID, I can change something. Let's change, I don't know, the price to $2.99. I can click execute and see that we get a 204, which is the correct response. So basically here you can also describe what types of responses a user can get. And then finally we can come in here, we can test our delete endpoint and the same thing, what type of responses. We can see a 204 response, therefore everything has went good. We can come back to our get, here's our get, we can execute once again. And this time we get a 404, which is not found. And this is exactly correct. This is not an error because we just deleted this book. Therefore, we did not find it. And this is what we will do in the video. So let's jump right into the code. So here we are in Visual Studio Code. And I must admit, setting this up takes a little bit of work. However, I think it's worth it because you set it up once, and then the changes that you'll have to do in case of you do any changes to your API will be minimal. And perhaps if we followed a slightly different approach, and here in the models we actually defined like a class for our book, or we were using an ORM, then it would even mean less work. And I think you will see why in a second. So in order to get started, let's go into our app folder. Let's create a new file. Let's call it swagger.js. In this file, we'll put our whole Swagger options. So all of our Swagger options. I think that's proper English. So let's begin. Let's call our object options. You can call it whatever you want. And now here, we will need to put some definitions. And essentially what we put right here will define the overall structure and overall contents of our application. And we will make changes here in this file. Then we will add this basically I will add the Swagger application as a separate route inside our app file. So here we'll just use a middleware function that will serve an endpoint, basically an endpoint in our application. And then where we'll also make changes is the routes folder. And here is where we will be using Swagger.js doc So basically a type of comments that allow us to describe the routes. And this is what will create the particular endpoints inside the Swagger application. Okay, so let's get started with the general setting. First thing you want to have is you want to have definition. If only I could spell. Now, the fields that I will now create here, this is what is required by Swagger in order to be started. And this is described very well in the Swagger documentation, although there you have also different options, because we could be writing all of this using JSDoc, we could be using YAML files. However, I think for us currently it's the most convenient just to use JavaScript object, because it fits some of the structure of our application. Okay, so first key you want to have is OpenAPI. And now OpenAPI is, I think, a little bit tricky concept to grasp, but essentially how I understand it is this is a convention that is used to describe APIs, REST APIs, and Swagger will, using this convention and using the particular version of this convention, we are using 3.0.0, will understand the other options that we pass and then understand the JS docs that we'll create for the routes so that it can parse it and can create this Swagger application for us. Okay, so this is first thing. Then we might want to add also info, right? A title, so let's say bookstore, CRUD, REST API. Once we start Swagger application, you will see when this shows up. And then we want to have a version. Let's have 1.0.0, so we are not currently versioning our API. And then we can have also a description. Let's say this is simple CRUD API made with Express and documented with Swagger. Okay, this is all about our description. Now, what else? What we want to have? We want to have servers. So basically, one application can serve many servers, and a server is defined by a URL that a server has. So here we could use, if you wanted to use it also with your deployed application, you could use some kind of environment variable to pass in the URL, but I will just say http://localhost 3000, right? So this is where our application lives. Then it also has a description, and I will just say, that this is a development server. Development. Writing is hard. Okay, so this is our server. Now, what else we have here is components. And essentially components are, I think you will see that, are essentially objects that will be somehow used in our application. So here we'll define essentially a book schema that we will later on reuse in many places of our API, just to let the Swagger application know that, hey, here there is a book returned, or here you should set or say send a book. So and we then say schemas. And this is where we will define a schema for our book. So we will say book. Now create an object. And essentially here, if you already had a class for book, you could just use it here. But as we don't, so we defined in the models, we just define the functions. We don't have like a class book and then class methods. Here we need to write it, right? And essentially, of course, there is an argument. Yes, now if you want to change something into a book, you need to change it into a database, you need to change it into models, and you need to change it here. But you have to, that's just life. You can, as I said, you can do it a little bit smarter. Maybe we could now define a book class and then reuse it here and then use it somewhere in the models. But to be honest, I don't think it makes sense. Okay, it's going to be an object. So our book is essentially an object with required fields. So I'll just say require. And these are the fields that must be filled in this object. And this is a title, this is an author, this is a price, and this is year published. We have one more attribute that does not need to be filled, and this is description. Then what you do is you say properties. And now properties are the actual fields that this object has. So in our case, this is an author, and this will be dictionaries, or not dictionaries, we are not in Python. This will be objects. So author is of a type string, and then it has a description that it is the author of the book. Okay, then we have a price. Price is of a type integer and has a description that it is the price of the book. Okay, then we have a price, done. Then we have a description, not describe, description. And the description is of a type string and has a description, also the description of the book. Okay, description, and last but not least, we have here published. We have a type string there, not string, sorry, integer. I think we defined the year published as integer, and then we have a description. This, not this, the year the book was published. Okay, and now what we want to define are the responses that our API can have. So essentially, what we will see is a number of responses that our API can send, right? So for example, if we have a missing API key, we would be sending a 400 response, right? So you can basically, if we go to auth, you are able to see it, right? So if here we have an API key missing, we respond with 400. If we have an invalid API key, so if the API key exists, or to be more precise, if the authorization header exists, but the contents of this header are incorrect, so are not a valid API key, we'll respond with 401. And if we also have some routes which look for a particular book, for example, this one, if we don't find this book, we respond with 404. And I'm looking for common answers that can be delivered by our API in all of the endpoints, right? So essentially what we want to have is we want to have the responses defined here. And now the most complex thing, we want the components end here, and we want to have it defined on the level of components. Okay, so essentially what we will say is we'll say responses, open an object here, and now we'll define it. So 400, and we'll open parentheses or brackets, and we'll say description. Let's say missing API key, include it in the authorization header. I always have issues spelling authorization. Authorization. Okay. And now I need to define contents of the response. So this is to let Swagger know, okay, what type of response I'm expecting. How do you want me to show the output? And we want it to be application/JSON. Okay, I'll just copy this thing. Maybe put a comma right here, because now we will define 401 and 404, right? So for the 401, what we will have is 401 for us is unauthorized. So we send it if a client has sent an API key in the correct header. However, we found the API key to be incorrect. So we say incorrect API key or incorrect format. Because I say the format because you have to remember that we have a basic and then white space before. So our authorization header looks as follows. We have the word basic, and then we have a white space, and then we have an API key. Okay, so here we have unauthorized. This is also application.json, and here we have 404. 404 is not found. Not found. The book was not found. Okay, these are our responses. And I currently think I have put this because this, so basically this response is supposed to be on the schema level. I put it one too far away, and this is a problem with this. Okay, so now it should be good. We'll just see if it works once we start the application, which we should be able to do. We need one more thing. Essentially, we need to go down here, and we need to, because this is, yeah, exactly. Okay, this is on the definition level. What we need to say is we need to say APIs. So essentially, where the Swagger application will be looking for the JS doc, or where it will be looking for our routes. And this will be inside /app, and this is important. We don't go from this folder, but we go from the root of our project, so from the app folder, right? So, or rather from this, not from the app folder, but so for me, it's called the Bookstore CRUD API, so from the general folder right here. So we need to go inside our app folder, and then we need to go inside routes. If only I could spell routes, and then book.js. Okay, so this is it. We now should be able to start our application. We just need to say module.exports options. So we need to export it from here, and we need to go into the app file, and here we'll need to install a few dependencies. So we go in here and we say npm I, we say swagger-js doc. So this is what we'll be using, and swagger-ui-express. And then finally, we need to install, oh no, that's it. So swagger.js doc and swagger UI express. So now it will be installed. And what we have to do is the following. So here at the end, before the listen of our application, what we will do is we'll just create our specs. So as specs are the options that we have just defined, or you don't have to call it specs. It is just how the Swagger docs call it. You say swagger.js doc, and then you say options, right? Options, and here we'll import it from Swagger. And this should be exactly here, imported very nice. So we imported the swagger.js doc, and then we imported our options from the swagger.js file. So now what we need to do here is we need to use our specs that we have defined. So basically we define a middleware function. We say app.use, and then after app.use, we say API docs. So this is the essentially part of the URL where the Swagger application will be. And then you say Swagger UI, and we need to import Swagger UI. So let's do it right here after the JS doc. So we basically say const Swagger UI equals require. And now we'll require it from swagger-UI-express. Okay, and we take this Swagger UI, we say Swagger UI.serve so that it serves this route, and then we pass in Swagger UI, and we will pass in our specs. So basically Swagger UI.setup specs. Okay, and that's it. Now, because we have installed a new dependency, we need to rebuild our images. So basically we need to say docker compose app -- build, and I will see you when it is built. Okay, everything seems to be fine. It's up and running. Let's open our browser now. And what you can see in the browser is a message that API key is missing. And this is right, because we are just trying to make a request to our API. And currently, what we have is we have this auth, or the check API key middleware, that is supposed to prevent requests without API key. So everything works as designed. However, we want to have access to our Swagger application without the need of us providing an API key, because it's kind of complex to provide an API key with a browser GET request, because when you go to /API docs, as we are just making a GET request to an API, to our API, to this API docs URL. So what we will need to do is we'll do something very simple. Inside this API key here, what we'll do is we will say request object, and in the request object we have something called original URL, basically a URL where the request was made. And then we say if it includes anything that has /API docs, because it will be making many requests, because essentially it needs to host the CSS file, JavaScript file, and then the fav icon and things like this. So essentially everything that goes to API docs, we can also do okay, so everything that includes API docs. And now what it should do, if this is true, it will just return next. So essentially we'll skip to this very point. And you can see that my app has crashed because I still struggle with the memory issues. And so I'll just restart it. I will go to my browser. I will refresh it, go to 100% zoom. And here you can see a Swagger application. You should also see it running. You can see our schema that for now is empty and should not be empty. So we'll take a look at this in a second. However, we have no operations defined. So we'll now need to go ahead and define our operations. So we'll need to describe our endpoints. But for now, let's go back to here. And we need to figure out why our schema is not showing up. And it's not showing because here I made a typo. Properties. Let's go. So currently I will restart my application because the node one I still did not fix. And I will now refresh it. Okay. And here now we can see our schema, right? So we can see an author, we can see price, we can see description, we can see year published. But I think we are missing one more thing. I don't think it's currently properly reading as the required, because we should say, I believe, required. Now I will restart it once again. Go to our application, refresh one more time. And now we can see which attributes are required. Okay, so the basic setup is done. Now we'll need to go ahead into our routes file, and we'll need to describe our routes. So that in the application itself, we get these options that we can send the requests. Okay, so in our routes file, what we want to do first is we want to go ahead here and we want to define a section. So essentially we want to have, if we had more sections, this would be useful. Currently we don't, but I think it's still good to have it organized for the future, even if. So essentially you make a comment, right? So how you start this section, and that's important because now like spaces will be important for us so that it reads it properly. You say /1*, second asterisk, and VS Code will produce you a space and an asterisk and a / closing /. Then you just hit enter and you have something like this. And here you say Swagger and tags. So we essentially write a tag section. And currently we write it in sort of a YAML syntax. So here you need to do 2 spaces or 4 spaces. It's important that these are not tabs. So essentially 2 spaces, and you say name, books, and then description. And also here you need to have 2 spaces. Description, API to manage, or API endpoints to manage books. You will see the tags section in a second. We could also define these tags right here, but I sort of like it to have it here. If I had more routes files, I would just create like 1 tag for each, at least 1 tag for each routes file. Okay, this we have. Now, we go ahead and create a second section like this. And here we will once again say add Swagger. And once again, this application will be restarting many times. So here we will say add Swagger. I will just maybe stop it so that it doesn't bother us for now. Once again, 2 spaces /book, colon, 2 spaces and additional 2 spaces, and then get. So basically here we define a route. So we say /book. We also could include the book /book in the server right here, right? So I could here say /book, and then I would not need to say it here, but then it would look a little bit worse in the UI because it would not show you the whole path. I mean, it would just show it, but in the server definition on the top. So essentially it would show it right here that it is /book, but I prefer just to have it here. That's a preference. And then get is the method that we are using here. So once again, 2 spaces, and we say summary. And let's say this is like a description. Let's say get all books, right? What we do here. So once again, we say spaces and then 2 spaces, or no. We'll now specify without the additional spaces what kind of tag it belongs to, and it belongs to our books tag. And then what we define is we define what kind of responses we can have here. So for our responses, what we will have is we'll have the following. We can have a response to 100. Right, let's check here if these are 2 spaces. Yes, indeed. And the response 200, what it will have is, it will have a description. Let's say the list of all books. If we get a response to 100, this means that this is a list of all books. And now what we'll have is we will have the contents of the response. So we need to tell the Swagger application, okay, what are the contents of the response that we are getting? So because it needs to then display it to us somehow. And what we'll be getting is application.json format data that will have the following schema, and this is where the schema comes into play. So here we'll say schema, and the schema will just use a reference to the file that we have created here. So we'll essentially set a reference to this schema that we have right here. You can do it very simple. You just say $ref and then a colon, and then here in single quotes you say hash, then / components, and these are the components I talked about, responses, and then you say say components, but then not responses but schemas. Yeah, I'm already ahead. And then you say book. All right, so this is basically a reference to this Swagger file right here, to the components, to schemas, and to a book. Okay, now we need to generate some additional responses, because this is a response to 100, and now we need to generate some more responses. So you can also get a 400 response. The 400 response we have already defined right here. So we have defined right here 400 and 401. And this is what we can get. So let's do a 400, and here we will just say, we'll just make the reference. So essentially everything will refer to components, but now not schemas, but responses. And then 400. And we can also have 401 in case this is an unauthorized request. And here, don't forget to change that 401 also. Okay, so let's currently start our application. Let's see how it goes. Okay, application is up and running. I will just refresh this part now. And here we can see the get part. So essentially here we can see our responses, the book schema we already defined. So let's currently try to hit execute. And what we can see, API key is missing. So therefore, this means that we cannot currently really use it because we will be getting 400 errors because we are not appending any API keys to the requests. Okay, so let's go ahead. In Swagger, as API authorization is very popular in APIs, therefore it has a great support for API authorization, luckily. So what we need to do is we need to go to our Swagger file, and then here underneath the responses, so essentially on the same level of the responses, we need to define a new object. And this object will be called security schemes. Important, schemes, not schemas. And now, currently you can have a name of the security scheme, whatever you want. Let's say API key auth. And now this will have the following properties. It will be of a type API key, right? Just a type. You can have also different types. You can have like the essentially other authentication types. The Swagger documentation describes it. And then where do we want to have it? In our case, this is a header. You can also have it as a cookie. You can have it in the query's URL itself as a query parameter. And then a name of the header is essentially authorization. damn it, authorization. You know what? I'll just go into our author. I'll just copy this, paste it right here, make this uppercase. Okay, I hope I managed. And then I only need to do one more thing. If we left it like this, then we would need to, with every route, refer, okay, this route is protected by this security scheme. So please allow the user in the Swagger application to include the API key. And I don't want to do it every time. Therefore, what I just do is I take this, I go ahead, and now I need to go, I believe that it needs to be on the level of components. Yes, essentially. And I'll just say security. And inside the security, I start to define an array and an object of, so essentially an array of objects, but it will have only one object. I say API key auth and then pass in an empty array. So essentially this will mean that Swagger should apply this security scheme that we have defined right here. So the API key auth, the name can be whatever you want, to every route that we have in our application. So now, okay, the application has restarted. Currently decided to start restarting again. And so I started properly. And now what we should see if I refresh this application is we see this little authorize button right here. And we also see this padlock next to our endpoint. Therefore, if I go into the authorize right here and I copy our API key. So if you remember, we have our API key in the .env file that we have down here. I'll currently not show it to you because there I have also a password to the emails that we have sent when we defined the custom logging of our API, where we basically defined that if there is an error, send us an email. If you didn't see this video, go check it out. I think it's really, really good. But currently we are discussing Swagger. Therefore, you have to copy your test API key. I think we also have it here. Essentially, yeah, this is this key. I can copy it from here. And then I need to go to the Swagger application, say basic, because that's the format we have defined, and then click authorize. So basic, white space, paste the API key, and then click authorize. And now, and you see the padlock is now closed. So now Swagger will add this API key to the authorization header, because this is how we define the security scheme, to every request. So now I will say execute, and what we can see is the response body that has the exact books that we have created, or these are our test books, right? So essentially what I can show you is if you come right here and you go to the test.rest that we have used and you execute this part, you get the exact same 4 books that we have in the Swagger application. So essentially Swagger replaces this test.rest. In a way, it's just a little bit more user-friendly. So maybe if you work with developers, yeah, something like this is sufficient. However, I would still recommend to invest the time and set up Swagger, because especially if you have to work with a little bit less technically skilled people, maybe with some business engineers, I think they will just appreciate the Swagger much, much more. Okay, but this is not the end of our work. As I said, this is a little bit of work to set it up initially, because we for now have described only one of our endpoints and we have some way to go. However, currently it will be much faster, and we can just go ahead and copy this part, paste it right here, and just change a few things. So here we have the endpoint that gets us a particular book. So what we'll do is we'll go in here and say book, and then this is how you define a parameter, essentially, right? Because here we take as a parameter everything that is after the book, right? So because here we are in the router, so we have /book and then /, and everything that's after the / becomes our book ID. So maybe it will be cleaner if I say book ID. So here you have also the summary. So basically we'll now be getting a book by ID, tags books, that's correct. And now instead of responses, or together with responses, we have also parameters section. And in the parameters section, what we'll have is in, and then we'll have the parameter in path, right? Because we have it in the URL. And then, okay, name of the parameter, is book ID. And then schema of this parameter, we also need to pass a parameter schema, is very simple because our parameter has just a type of string. And then we also say that it is required true, and the description ID of a book. Okay, so now we have it. I see, so our application restarting 17,000 times. I will now set it up, and I think here we can add maybe one more response, because we can here now get the 404 also, right? So we can get 404. Okay, so once again, I'll kill our application, restart, and here I will refresh our Swagger application, and now you can see that we have this one right here. Here we have an error. Okay, it could not resolve a reference to a 404 response. This means that we must have an issue in the here. Ah, yes. Well. Yeah. Okay. Here it's a board. Okay, restart. So basically here we had a 400. We can, I think, go back here to our book IDs. So now if I come in here, if I refresh, we can see that we can currently make this request. And now it requires a book ID because it's required. And now we get a missing API key because we would need to once again authorize the requests right here. But for now, let's not do it. Let's continue to our next route, because I think next route is, if I remember correctly, this is the post route. Exactly. So this will be, I think, the only one that is still a little bit different to us, because here we need to have the request body. So we no longer have the ID right here. We make a post request on /book. However, here instead of parameters, we'll have a request body. And now the request body will be required. That's true. And now for the content of it. It will not have a description, but it will have a content. Now, content of this request body is application/JSON. And now for this application.json, it has a schema. And now inside the schema, we'll just refer. So we'll say $ref, and then here inside the single quotation marks, we'll just say hash / components / schemas book. And this will refer it to our Swagger file, to our book schema. Okay, now for the responses, what we can have is we can have a 200. We can't have a 200, sorry. We can have a 400, we can have a 401, we can't have a 404. So here we can have a 201. So if you remember correctly, if we create a book successfully, we pass a 201 response. And this we have not defined because this response we'll be using only here. So essentially a description, book created successfully. And then what we need to do is once again place the contents of the response, and the contents are application/JSON. Okay, so we have described a next route. Therefore, I will just copy the part that we have up here. I will go down to our patch route. So here I'll change the method to patch, not path, but patch, and just take a look. Here I didn't change the method. So I have to remember to change the method from get to post. And here I'll have the patch method now. So now we have once again the book ID. So here we have once again the book ID. And now we need to also copy the requests right here. So here I made a temporary request body. We need to copy the request body from down here, because now we have a parameter. That's true, that's the book ID, but we also have a request body. So we need to paste it right here. So essentially, This request body is required, that's correct. We have the contents, application JSON, and then schema, it's also the book. But now what I do is I use a trick. I say required, and I do not pass anything after required. This will just change this schema so that no parameter is required. Because if you remember, our patch logic is that we can only send the attribute that we want to see updated, right? So if we just want to update the price, we just send, okay, the ID here in the URL, and then we say only the price and the new price, and everything else stays the same. And I believe something like this allows us to do it. So we don't have to pass the whole object once again. And now for the responses, what we can get is we can certainly get a 401. We can also get a 404, I believe, if the book doesn't exist, but we can't get a 200. We can get a 204. So if we update everything and everything went smooth, we get a 204. And this means that the book updated successfully. And the contents are application.json, but however, we are not getting a book as a schema anymore. We are just getting a message that a book has been updated. Okay, so now here, let's copy this thing because we still have the delete to do. Remember to change the method. So now it's delete. And what we change here is delete a book. We also have the book ID. Currently, we don't have the request body, therefore we can delete it. And from the responses, what we can get is 204. So book deleted successfully. 400 we can, 401 we can, and 404 we can get. Okay, I hope that went smooth. I'll just now restart this application once again. I hope that went smooth and quick. I will just restart the application. See, here we can see everything is working. I will refresh this application right here. Let's remove all of this so that we have it, see it like right here. And here you can now see all of our methods. We have the 5 endpoints that we have, and I will currently once again copy the API key on my side. I will go into authorize. Once again, we say basic and then paste the API key and say authorize. And now essentially, let's try to do what I did in the intro to this. So let's try it out. Let's say execute. We have all of our books. Let's close it. Let's go to post book. And here we can see that currently these values that are here do not really look that good, at least for me, right? Because here we have just the types, and I would like to have a slightly better example. Therefore, what we can do is we can go to the schema that we have right here. We can come right after we have this. So essentially inside our book schema, and here we can create a keyword or a key that's called example. And inside this example, we can create our example book so that it looks a little bit better on the website. So let's say that author is John Doe. Let's say that price is $1.99. Description. Let's say that, I don't know. This is a description of a book. Year published. I don't know, 2022. Once again, let's stop the application by hitting Ctrl+C. And let's start it once again. Let's go right here. A little bit annoying is the fact that each and every time I have to authorize it. You could also turn off the authorization for the dev server totally by, for example, going right here into the auth, saying if node_env environment variable is equal to development, then just return next. So essentially to skip the authorization altogether. Yeah, but I don't want to do it because then we also have tests based on it. And currently you can see that here we have our example values. So when I hit try it out and I hit execute, we currently get a message that a book has been created. So I will just copy this because now we will try to get this book. So try it out, paste the ID here, and we can see the exact book that we have created. And currently in the patch right here, let's say try it out, paste it, and now let's try to change, I don't know, the price to $2.99, right? And currently let's execute this. And we can see basically a 204 response. So here you can see the response that you got. And this means that our book has been updated properly. Let's go once again to the get of a particular book. Let's execute this once again. And we can see that the price is now $2.99. We also said that we support the fact that we don't need to send all the options. So let's try to do it. Let's try to update the price to 400. The inflation. We also got a 204, and therefore I would expect if we now go in here and execute this part, the price is 400. So you don't have to send all the attributes, you can just send one. And now, last but not least, we have the delete. Once again, try it out, paste the book ID, execute. We got a 204, therefore this just means no content, means everything has been done correctly. So now if we go to this get route, we execute, we got a 404. This means that the book has not been found. Okay, this is it. I currently don't know how long this video took, but I don't think it was that long. I was expecting it's going to take a little bit longer, around an hour. I think we have managed to do it in a little bit over half an hour. That's my feeling. However, I think it's very, very useful. Just so imagine that, right? You have an enterprise project, you have an API, and then you define something like this, and basically this is your documentation, right? Of course, now you have to maintain it, as always with documentation, and maybe sometimes you could do it a little bit easier. There are some other API frameworks that have a little bit better integration with Swagger, but let's also not be so pessimistic about it. It's not that much work, and I think it can bring you huge benefits, because I think in general as backend developers we often lack the marketing for our works, right? Because the front-end guys have the fancy animations and the fancy front ends. However, we very often lack the marketing a little bit for our work, right? And I think a documentation like this is very cool. It's interactive, people can click around. I think the reception is always has been, when we set these kinds of things up, very positive. So now, essentially, you can do it too. You can have a little bit of marketing for your APIs. It's also much easier to show front-end projects, back-end projects that you have done in your CV. If you just set this simple Swagger application, then you host it somewhere, right? So basically a deployment here would be just as deployment of this API to a server. If you want to see it in another video, please let me know in the comments. If you like this video, if you have watched it to this very point, please leave me a like button on the video. This helps a lot. And for now, I would like to thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next videos.